The classroom is unusually quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet that comes from focus, but the tight, uneasy silence that settles when everyone senses something is about to go wrong. Desks are lined in neat rows, papers open, pencils resting but unused. The clock ticks louder than it should. Then a voice cuts through it, sharp, impatient, carrying authority without warmth. The teacher clears his throat and calls out a name. One student. A black girl sitting near the middle of the room. His tone isn't curious. It isn't supportive. It's clipped, almost theatrical. The kind of voice meant to draw attention. Heads turn. Chairs shift. She looks up slowly, already aware that this moment isn't accidental. He gestures toward the book in her hands and tells her to read aloud. When she doesn't move immediately, he repeats himself, this time louder, stretching the words as if volume alone will force compliance. A few students exchange glances. One boy smirks, elbowing his friend. Another student stares down at their desk, suddenly very interested in the grain of the wood. No one laughs out loud, but the tension hums. The request hangs in the air, heavy and public. This isn't encouragement. This isn't teaching. It's a spotlight, and it's been turned on without consent. The girl stands slowly. You can see the calculation behind her eyes, not fear, but awareness. She knows exactly what's expected of her. A mistake. A stumble. Proof that the teacher's tone was justified. The room seems to lean forward, waiting for it. The teacher folds his arms, satisfied. He's certain of how this will go. He believes the room will confirm his assumptions. He believes control looks like this. She takes a breath. The pages of the book barely tremble in her hands. The clock ticks once more. And then, just before any sound escapes her lips, the moment stretches. Because what happens next means nothing will be the same. And that's when she spoke her first sentence. From the outside, this school looks like a place where nothing goes wrong. Clean hallways, trophy cases polished to a shine, photos of past academic achievements lining the walls like proof of order and excellence. Parents trust it. Administrators praise it. And inside its classrooms, students are taught to believe that authority here is fair, measured, and always acting in their best interest. That morning began like any other. The same bell. The same routine. The same teacher standing at the front of the room. He was respected, at least on paper. Known for high standards. Known for being tough but effective. Some called his sarcasm motivation. Others called it honesty. Very few ever questioned it out loud. In this classroom, challenging him wasn't just difficult, it felt unthinkable. And then there was the girl. She wasn't disruptive. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't invisible either, just quiet. Intelligent in a way that didn't announce itself. She completed her work, listened closely, and spoke only when she felt certain. The kind of student teachers often overlook because she doesn't demand attention. The kind who learns deeply, but privately. The imbalance was subtle, but real. One voice held authority. The others learned quickly when to stay silent. Students watched carefully, absorbing the unspoken rules. Sarcasm was allowed from the front of the room, never from the desks. Laughter traveled one direction, correction traveled the other. So when he called on her that day, it raised a question no one wanted to ask, but everyone felt. Was this just discipline? A routine classroom exercise? Or was it something far more deliberate, a moment designed not to teach, but to expose? To remind everyone who held the power and who did not. Because what followed didn't just interrupt a lesson. It cracked open the room itself. It forced students to confront what they had normalized. It challenged a kind of authority that thrives on silence. And by the time it was over, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The tension in that classroom did not begin on the day she was forced to read aloud. It had been building quietly, layered moment by moment, long before anyone realized what it would lead to. For weeks, the pattern was subtle enough to be dismissed by anyone who wasn't paying close attention. a correction here, a remark there, small enough to seem insignificant in isolation, but together they formed something unmistakable. Whenever the girl spoke, the teacher's response was sharper than it needed to be. If she answered a question correctly but hesitated for a second, he corrected her tone rather than her content. If she mispronounced a word once, he repeated it back exaggeratedly, drawing attention to the mistake instead of the meaning. Other students made the same errors all the time, but with them, he simply nodded and moved on. With her, the correction lingered. One afternoon, during a discussion, she raised her hand carefully, waiting until the teacher finished speaking. Her posture was straight, her eyes focused, her answer clearly prepared. He scanned the room, skipped over her hand entirely, and called on someone else, then another, and another. Eventually, her arm lowered on its own. Not in frustration, but in quiet understanding. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. The class noticed. They always did. A few students reacted the way students often do when discomfort mixes with fear through nervous laughter. When the teacher mocked her pronunciation one morning, repeating the word slowly with a smirk, a couple of students laughed under their breath. Not because it was funny, but because laughter felt safer than silence. Others kept their eyes fixed on their notebooks, pretending not to hear, not to see. Silence in that room was survival. No one challenged him. No one ever did. The teacher had a reputation. He was known for being strict, for preparing students for the real world. Administrators praised his results. Parents admired his discipline. Students learned quickly that questioning his methods only made things worse. Those who pushed back were labeled difficult. Those who stayed quiet were left alone. And so the culture settled into place. The assignment that led to everything was announced casually, almost offhand. A public reading exercise. Each student would be required to read a section aloud from a dense, unfamiliar text. The language was complex, filled with long sentences and unfamiliar vocabulary. Even confident readers shifted uncomfortably in their seats when the books were handed out. Public reading had always been his favorite tool. It wasn't about comprehension. It was about exposure, about seeing who stumbled under pressure and who didn't, about watching confidence crack in real time. The room filled with low murmurs as students flipped through the pages, silently scanning the paragraphs they hoped they wouldn't be assigned. The girl read ahead carefully. She always did. She underlined difficult words, traced sentences with her finger, prepared herself quietly. She knew what was coming. She also knew that preparation didn't always protect her. As names were called one by one, the pattern became clearer. When students stumbled, the teacher interrupted quickly, correcting them with impatience but without ridicule. When someone laughed nervously at their own mistake, he waved it off. But when it was her turn in previous weeks, during smaller exercises, shorter responses, his tone changed. It sharpened. "You should know this by now," he'd said once when she paused mid-sentence. "Speak clearly," he'd added another time, as if clarity were a personal failing. "Try again," always delivered with a sigh that told the room exactly what he expected. By the time the reading assignment was announced, several students already sensed what was coming. A few glanced toward her desk, then quickly looked away. They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to be next. On the morning of the incident, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The text selected was one of the most difficult in the unit. Long passages. Complex ideas. Even the strongest readers felt the pressure. The teacher stood at the front of the room, flipping through his copy with an expression that suggested anticipation rather than concern. When he began calling names, his pacing slowed. He corrected small errors. Yes, but his eyes kept drifting back to her, watching, waiting. When her hand went up once, then twice, offering to answer a comprehension question, he ignored it completely. Instead, he redirected the discussion elsewhere, letting the moment stretch just long enough for her to lower her arm again. And then, finally, he said her name. The way he said it was different. Louder, slower, as if he wanted to make sure everyone heard. A few students stiffened immediately. One girl in the back row stopped writing mid-sentence. Someone near the window let out a small, nervous breath. He didn't ask if she was ready. He didn't offer context or encouragement. He simply told her to begin reading. When she didn't stand immediately, he repeated the instruction, his voice rising just enough to draw attention. "Read it aloud," he said again, "so everyone can hear." The message was clear. This wasn't about learning. It was about performance, about putting her in front of the room and letting the outcome speak for itself. His posture told the rest of the story. Arms crossed, chin lifted slightly. The expression of someone who believes the moment will confirm what they already think. He expected hesitation, a mistake, proof that his earlier corrections had been justified. Around the room, reactions were split. A few students leaned forward, curious. Others looked down, uncomfortable. No one spoke. No one intervened. The stage had been set long before that day. The build-up was complete. Every ignored hand, every exaggerated correction, every nervous laugh had led to this moment. And in the teacher's mind, the outcome was already decided. He expected her to fail. The teacher called her name again, slower this time, as if stretching it would pull her to her feet. The sound of it echoed longer than it should have in the quiet room. Heads turned back toward her desk. The attention was no longer subtle. It was complete. She didn't stand right away. Not because she didn't know what to do. Not because she hadn't prepared. The hesitation came from something else, entirely an awareness that this moment wasn't neutral. She understood, with a clarity far beyond her years, that she was being positioned. That whatever happened next would be watched, judged, and remembered. She knew the room was no longer just a classroom. It was a stage. The teacher cleared his throat, impatience slipping into his voice. "Go on," he said, tapping the edge of his desk with a pen. "Read." She pushed her chair back slowly and stood. The movement felt louder than it was. Her book was already open, the page marked, her place carefully tracked. Still, she didn't begin immediately. She took a breath, not to calm fear, but to steady herself. Around her, the room tightened. "Louder," the teacher said, before she even spoke. The word cut through the silence, sharp and unnecessary. It wasn't a correction. It was a command. A reminder of who controlled the moment. She lifted her eyes briefly, just long enough to meet his gaze. There was no confusion there. No defiance either. Just understanding. "I can't hear you from back here," he added, his tone carrying a hint of mockery now. "Don't be shy." A few students shifted in their seats. One boy near the aisle let out a small, nervous laugh, quickly swallowing it when no one joined in. Another student pressed their lips together, eyes fixed straight ahead. The laughter that sometimes followed his remarks didn't come this time. Something about this felt different. He wasn't correcting a mistake. He was pressing. The girl looked back down at the page. Her hands tightened slightly around the paper, knuckles whitening just a bit. The camera would linger there if this were being filmed, on her fingers gripping the edge of the book, on the way the paper barely trembled. Not shaking from fear, but from tension. The kind that comes from being watched too closely. "Read," he said again, louder now. "We're waiting." The room grew heavier with every second she didn't speak. You could almost hear the collective breath being held. Desks stopped creaking. Pens paused mid-air. Even the clock seemed to hesitate between ticks. This was the moment when it became undeniable. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't instruction. This was power, exercised openly and without restraint. The teacher wasn't guiding her through the text. He was daring her to falter. He was inviting the room to witness it. Students felt it instinctively. Some leaned forward, not out of curiosity, but out of discomfort. Others leaned back, as if distance might absolve them from participation. No one spoke. Silence, once again, did the work for him. "Go on," he said, folding his arms. "Show us." The words landed with a finality that made it clear he believed the outcome was already decided. He believed the pause meant weakness. He believed the room would soon confirm his authority. Her grip tightened for just a moment more. Then, slowly, deliberately, she adjusted the book in her hands. The movement was small but intentional. It signaled something only a few noticed at first. She was ready. Around the room, students exchanged quick glances. Someone near the window inhaled sharply, then froze. Another student clasped their hands together under the desk. No one wanted to blink. No one wanted to miss what might happen next. The teacher tilted his head slightly, a satisfied expression settling across his face. To him, this hesitation was validation. Proof that calling her out had been the right decision. Proof that his earlier corrections, his sarcasm, his tone had all been justified. He had no idea what he was about to lose. The girl lifted her chin, just a fraction. Her eyes returned to the page, not because she was afraid to look up, but because the words mattered more than the room. She drew in a slow breath, not rushed, not shaky, controlled. The room seemed to contract around her. This was the point of no return. The moment where humiliation was supposed to land. Where a single stumble would ripple into laughter, into knowing looks, into a lesson she would carry far longer than the text in front of her. Her classmates felt it. They held their breath, waiting for the crack in her voice, waiting for the mispronounced word, waiting for the teacher to interrupt with that familiar sigh. But as the silence stretched, something subtle shifted. The longer she stood there, composed and unmoving, the less certain the teacher seemed. His pen stopped tapping. His posture stiffened. Still, he didn't stop her. The power was still his or so, he thought. The room waited. Her hands steadied on the page. The paper no longer trembled. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It turned inward, focused, precise. And just as the silence reached its breaking point, just as the teacher opened his mouth to speak again, she finally began. The first word was moments away, and no one in that room was prepared for it. She begins to read. The sound of her voice enters the room gently, almost cautiously at first, not because it lacks confidence, but because it is measured, calm, intentional. The first word lands clearly, each syllable shaped with care. There is no rush to prove anything, no nervous speed, just control. The effect is immediate. The room, which had been braced for failure, pauses instead. A smirk fades halfway off someone's face before they realize it was there at all. A quiet laugh, meant to slip out under the cover of expectation, never fully forms. It dies before becoming sound. Her voice is steady. Not loud in the way the teacher demanded, but full carrying naturally, filling the space without strain. Clear enough that no one needs to lean forward. Controlled enough that no one wonders what word might come next. Perfect diction, not rehearsed, not exaggerated. Just precise. Every consonant crisp, every vowel deliberate. She reads as if the text belongs to her, as if she understands not just how the words sound, but what they mean. The sentence unfolds smoothly, without interruption, without hesitation. Something shifts. Chairs that had been rocking idly come to rest. A student who had been tapping a foot stops mid-motion. Even the clock seems quieter now, its ticking less intrusive against the sound of her voice. The room is no longer waiting for a mistake. It is listening. The teacher's expression changes almost imperceptibly at first. The confident tilt of his head straightens. His eyes narrow not in criticism, but in recalibration. This is not the outcome he anticipated. He does not interrupt her. He doesn't correct the word. He doesn't sigh. He simply watches. She continues the sentence without pause. Her pacing is unhurried, giving each phrase the space it needs. She doesn't speed up when the room grows quiet. She doesn't slow down for effect either. She reads as if she has always been meant to be heard. The silence deepens. It's not an awkward silence. Not the kind that follows a misstep or invites commentary. This silence is attentive, respectful. The kind that settles when people realize they are witnessing something they didn't expect. A few students glance at one another, eyes widening slightly. One girl in the front row lifts her head from her notebook, realizing she hasn't been writing for several seconds. Another student, who had been leaning back with crossed arms, straightens unconsciously, drawn in despite themselves. The teacher's pen slips from his fingers and taps softly against the desk. He doesn't reach for it right away. She reaches the end of the sentence and pauses, not because she's unsure, but because the punctuation demands it. A clean stop. A breath taken exactly where it belongs. She does not look up for approval. She does not scan the room for reaction. She simply moves on. The next sentence flows just as smoothly. If anything, her voice grows more assured, not louder, but more grounded. The initial tension drains from her posture, replaced by something quieter and stronger. Ownership. She stands fully now, shoulders relaxed, feet planted evenly. This is no longer a test. It's a reading. The teacher's mouth opens slightly, as if to speak, then closes again. He had been ready with a comment, a correction, a reminder, but there is nothing to interrupt, nothing to fix. Around the room, the atmosphere continues to change. The discomfort that once filled the space gives way to something closer to awe. Students stop thinking about how they appear and start thinking about what they're hearing. The text, which moments ago felt intimidating and dense, suddenly makes sense. Her clarity cuts through its complexity. She doesn't stumble over the difficult words. She doesn't hesitate at the longer sentences. When a phrase requires emphasis, she finds it naturally, not theatrically, but intuitively. It's clear now that this isn't luck. It's understanding. The teacher shifts his weight, uncrossing his arms. The posture of authority he had adopted feels out of place now, almost intrusive. His role in this moment is diminished, and he knows it. The room no longer belongs to him. She continues reading, and with every sentence, the room sinks deeper into silence. Not the silence of fear this time, but the silence of focus, of recognition, the kind that feels heavy because it matters. No one laughs, no one whispers, no one moves. She reaches another pause, another clean stop. Her breathing remains steady. She is not performing for applause. She's not proving a point. She's simply doing exactly what was asked of her, only better than anyone expected, including the teacher. His face betrays confusion now. Not anger, not embarrassment yet, just disbelief. He had expected to intervene, to reclaim control. But every second she reads without fault makes that more difficult. The class senses it too. The power dynamic has shifted, not with a dramatic gesture, but with competence. With excellence so undeniable it leaves no room for commentary. This is the kind of moment no one forgets, not because it's loud, but because it's quiet. She finishes the paragraph and pauses again. This time, the silence stretches longer than punctuation requires. No one rushes to fill it. No one dares to. The teacher looks around, perhaps expecting someone to laugh now, to release the tension. No one does. He clears his throat, but the sound feels weak in the stillness. She waits, patient, composed. The book rests comfortably in her hands now, no longer gripped tightly. The paper is still. So is she. Instead, it is the moment she takes control of the room without saying anything beyond the words on the page. She doesn't rush to finish. She doesn't look relieved. She doesn't look defiant. She owns the moment simply by existing within it. And everyone in that classroom understands, without a single word being spoken, that something irreversible has just happened. The teacher finally interrupts, But the moment has shifted so completely that even his voice sounds different now. It's softer, uncertain, stripped of the sharp authority it carried just minutes ago. He clears his throat and starts to say her name, as if to regain control of the rhythm of the room, as if reminding everyone that he is still there. She pauses for half a second, not in submission, not in confusion. Then she continues. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't glance up to challenge him. She simply resumes reading smoothly and calmly, picking up exactly where she left off. The interruption dissolves into the air, unfinished and ineffective. The words reclaim the space, and with them, so does she. That's when it becomes undeniable. She isn't just decoding letters on a page. She's shaping meaning. Her phrasing reveals an understanding of the text's structure, its intent. She emphasizes clauses where emphasis belongs, softens where nuance is needed, and allows complex ideas to unfold naturally. Sentences that once felt dense now feel deliberate, clear. Interpretation replaces recitation. The room notices. A student in the second row tilts their head, surprised not by her confidence, but by how much sense the passage suddenly makes. Another student's eyebrows lift as a difficult concept clicks into place for the first time. The text isn't being read at them anymore. It's being explained through tone alone. Her vocabulary gives her away not in a showy way, but subtly. She doesn't stumble over unfamiliar words because they aren't unfamiliar to her. She pronounces them with ease, not because she memorized them last night, but because she's met them before, studied them, understood them. This isn't luck. This is preparation. The teacher shifts again, more noticeably now. He opens his mouth, closes it. His eyes flick down to his own copy of the text, as if searching for something she might miss. A mistake. A pause. Anything. He finds nothing. When he speaks again, his voice lacks its earlier confidence. That's enough, he says, but the words don't land. They hover, unconvincing. There's no urgency behind them, no authority left to enforce them. She reaches the end of the paragraph and stops naturally, exactly where the section concludes. She doesn't rush past it. She doesn't stop short. She finishes because it is finished. Then she looks up, not defiantly, not triumphantly, just present. A quiet acknowledgement that she's done what was asked. No more, no less. The silence that follows is different from any silence that came before. It isn't tense. It isn't fearful. It's reflective. The kind that settles when people realize they've misjudged someone and are reckoning with it. Classmates react first. A girl near the back shifts in her seat, suddenly aware of the smirk she wore earlier. It fades, replaced by something closer to admiration. A boy who had laughed nervously before now stares straight ahead, uncomfortable in a new way. Not amused, not superior, just aware. Respect enters the room quietly. Shock follows close behind. Students begin to process what they've just witnessed. Not only that she read flawlessly, but that she understood the text better than anyone expected. Better than some of them. Perhaps better than the teacher himself. And with that realization comes something else. Embarrassment. Not hers. His. The teacher stands at the front of the room, posture stiff, eyes darting briefly from student to student. He can feel it. The shift. The subtle but unmistakable change in how he's being seen. The authority he relied on moments ago no longer feels secure. His earlier sarcasm echoes back at him now, stripped of its justification. He tries to reframe the moment. Offers a vague comment about strong reading skills and moving on. But the words sound hollow, procedural, like an attempt to cover something already exposed. The students aren't fooled. They've seen too much. The girl returns to her seat slowly, calmly. She doesn't rush to sit down as if relieved. She doesn't linger as if waiting for approval. She simply resumes her place, opening her notebook as if this were always how the lesson was meant to go. His. But nothing is the same. Eyes follow her now not with judgment, but with curiosity, with recognition. She's become something else in the room. Not louder, not dominant, but undeniable. The teacher avoids her gaze as he calls on the next student. His voice is flattened, careful now. He no longer corrects pronunciation with flair. He no longer jokes. The room has taught him something too, whether he's ready to admit it or not. The power dynamic has flipped completely. Not through confrontation, not through accusation, but through competence so visible it left no room for doubt. Authority didn't crumble loudly. It slipped quietly, unmistakably into irrelevance. And everyone in that classroom understands what just happened. They witnessed someone being underestimated and rising not by force, but by excellence. They watched a moment designed to humiliate transform into one that revealed the limits of power when it is challenged by preparation and calm confidence. The teacher may still stand at the front of the room, but the room no longer belongs to him. The shift doesn't end when she sits back down. If anything, that's when the consequences begin. The teacher clears his throat again and straightens his posture, as if physical alignment might restore what has slipped away. He calls the next name on the list, forcing his voice into a firmer register. He moves the lesson forward quickly, too quickly, speaking over the natural pauses that usually follow a reading. It's an attempt to regain control through momentum, to pretend nothing unusual has happened. But the room doesn't follow him the way it used to. Students answer more carefully now. Some hesitate before speaking, as if weighing their words. Others glance toward her desk, unconsciously measuring themselves against what they've just witnessed. The teacher corrects a minor mistake from another student, but the sarcasm is gone. The comment lands flat. No one laughs. He feels it. He knows something has changed. By the end of the period, the tension hasn't disappeared. It has transformed. What once felt like fear now feels like awareness. When the bell rings, students don't rush out as they usually do. A few linger, packing their bags slowly. Two students exchange quiet words near the door, their voices low but animated. Later that day, the moment leaves the classroom. A student mentions it in the hallway. Another brings it up at lunch. The story travels quickly, not exaggerated, not embellished, just repeated with disbelief. She read it perfectly. He tried to stop her. Did you hear how quiet it got? By the time the administration hears about it, the details are already clear. A meeting is called. The teacher is asked to explain what happened. He describes it as a routine exercise, a misunderstanding, a moment taken out of context. But administrators listen more closely than he expects. They ask specific questions about tone, about consistency, about previous complaints that never quite surfaced, but were never forgotten either. Other teachers begin to take notice as well. Thus, one mentions that the girl has always excelled in written work. Another recalls how rarely she speaks in class and how precise her language is when she does. A counselor points out that students have quietly expressed discomfort in that classroom before, never formally, never loudly, but consistently enough to matter. The incident becomes a reference point, a moment that connects dots no one wanted to see individually. Back in the classroom, the change is unmistakable. Students sit differently now, straighter, more alert. A few raise their hands more often. One student, who's never spoken before, asks a question during the next lesson. It's tentative, but it's there. The teacher answers it without comment, without judgment. The exchange feels fragile, like something new being tested. Another student challenges a point politely, cautiously, but openly. The room freezes for a second, waiting for the familiar response. It doesn't come. The teacher pauses, then answers. Briefly, carefully. Authority has not vanished, but it has been questioned. And once authority is questioned, it is never quite the same. Respect begins to redistribute itself, not away from the teacher entirely, but no longer concentrated in one place. Students begin to recognize it in preparation, in clarity, in calm confidence. They begin to see it in each other, and especially in her. She doesn't seek attention in the days that follow. She doesn't replay the moment. She doesn't correct anyone's assumptions. She continues to take notes, complete assignments, and raise her hand selectively. When called on, she answers as she always has, thoughtfully, precisely, without flourish. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't argue. She doesn't explain herself. Her composure becomes its own quiet lesson. When another reading assignment comes up weeks later, the teacher's tone is different, neutral, almost cautious. When he calls her name this time, it's without emphasis, without edge. She reads again, well, as expected now. No one reacts dramatically. That, too, matters. Her excellence has been normalized. And that may be the greatest consequence of all. The classroom settles into a new balance. Students feel less afraid to be seen, less afraid to be heard. The teacher teaches differently, not kinder, necessarily, but more aware, more restrained. The ease with which he once wielded sarcasm is gone. The moment didn't end careers. It didn't spark public confrontation. It didn't explode into scandal. It did something quieter. It changed the atmosphere. It taught students that silence can be broken not with noise, but with preparation. That power can be challenged, not with rebellion, but with excellence. That humiliation fails when the person it targets refuses to internalize it. And through it all, the girl remains exactly who she was before. Quiet, intelligent, composed. She simply finished reading. What happened in that classroom was never really about reading. The book, the text, the assignment. Those were just the setting, the stage, the surface-level excuse for something much deeper. What unfolded wasn't a lesson in literacy or performance. It was a lesson in how easily people are underestimated, and how quietly that underestimation shapes entire environments. From the beginning, the assumptions were already made about who would struggle, about who would excel, about who deserved patience and who deserved scrutiny. The teacher didn't need to say those assumptions out loud. They lived in his tone, in his pauses, in who he corrected gently and who he corrected sharply, in who he invited into the conversation and who he overlooked. And the room absorbed those assumptions without question. That's how underestimation works. It rarely announces itself as cruelty. More often, it disguises itself as routine, as just how things are done, as discipline, as standards. But underneath it all is the same quiet belief that some voices need to be tested harder, challenged more, pushed further, because they are presumed weaker from the start. This wasn't about reading aloud. It was about being placed under a microscope while others were given space to breathe. And the moment that changed everything wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve raised voices or public confrontation. There was no speech, no declaration, no argument. There was just a sentence, spoken calmly, clearly, without apology. That's what made it so powerful. Because intelligence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to perform confidence the way people expect. It doesn't always raise its hand first or speak the loudest in the room. Sometimes it sits quietly, preparing, observing, waiting for the moment it's forced into the light. And strength doesn't need permission. It doesn't ask whether it's allowed to exist. It doesn't wait for approval from authority. When it finally emerges, it does so on its own terms, steady, controlled, undeniable. The girl didn't win that moment by proving someone wrong out loud. She didn't expose the teacher with words. She didn't demand respect. She earned it simply by being excellent when excellence was least expected. That's the kind of victory that lingers. Not because it humiliates the person who underestimated you, but because it reshapes the room. It forces everyone watching to confront their own assumptions, to ask themselves who they've misjudged, who they've ignored, who they've laughed at nervously instead of standing beside. And it does all of that without a single accusation. No shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic payoff designed for applause. Just excellence. That quiet kind of excellence that leaves no room for denial. That makes authority uncomfortable, not because it's challenged directly, but because it's revealed as unnecessary in that moment. The silence that followed her first sentence wasn't empty. It was full of realization, full of recalibration, full of the understanding that something irreversible had happened, not to the teacher's position, but to the room's awareness. Everyone heard the same sentence, but not everyone learned the same lesson. Some learned that preparation matters. Some learned that confidence doesn't have to look loud. Some learned, perhaps for the first time, that the people we assume will falter are often the ones carrying the most weight quietly. And some learned how dangerous it is to mistake silence for inability. That classroom never went back to what it was before. Not because rules changed overnight or authority disappeared, but because once underestimation is exposed, it loses its power. Once a room sees that excellence can come from the place it least expected, it becomes harder to justify dismissiveness, harder to justify sarcasm, harder to justify silence imposed from the top down. And the girl? She didn't change either. She didn't need to. She didn't become louder. She didn't seek attention. She didn't rewrite herself to fit a new role. She remained exactly who she was: quiet, intelligent, composed. The difference was that the room finally caught up to what had always been there. That's the quiet truth at the heart of this story. The most powerful moments don't always announce themselves with noise. Sometimes they arrive softly, in a calm voice, carrying a single sentence that changes how a space breathes. So the next time a room goes quiet, ask yourself why. Is it fear, or is it recognition? How many voices are silenced? Simply because someone in power assumes they should be? And how many moments like this pass unseen, unheard, because no one ever pauses long enough to listen? Fade out on the silence. The same silence that filled the room after her first sentence. The silence that spoke louder than anything else ever could.